Thanks everyone for joining us, and welcome to our webinar on protecting your IP in China. And we're here today to give you a good sense of what Canadian companies, whether you're in food tech or the agri-food supply chain, what you need to know in order to confidently enter the Chinese market. I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists because we're operating on a very different time zone than each other, and they've been very gracious with their time late in the day. I'm going to start with a round of introductions and turn it over to each of you to, give us a sense of your role and things like that. And Maxim, I'm going to start with you. So Maxim is the Counsellor, Head of Agriculture Trade at the Embassy of Canada to China. And, your focus, Maxim, is on a sector where innovation is everything, or, certainly a key differentiating factor. I'd love it if you could introduce yourself and share a little bit on why IP protection, in your opinion, is so critical for Canadian exporters in your market specifically.
Thanks very much, Alex. Let me start maybe by giving a very brief introduction of our agriculture network in China. We have a team of about 20 people in the embassy in Beijing, as well as the consulates in Shanghai, Guangzhou, Hong Kong, and Chongqing. Our colleagues work on both market development and market access issues. So we help Canadian exporters of agricultural products, agricultural technologies, to find business partners in China and make sure that their products and services can actually legally enter China. What I would say in terms of IP, I actually don't think that in sort of agri-tech or agri-food innovation, IP is any more or less important than it is in any other sector. It is absolutely critical, of course, to make sure that the core knowledge that that drives your business is adequately protected. And Scott, my colleague Scott and Xiaojuan, their team is working hard at giving our clients advice in that regard. So maybe I'll turn over to Scott to offer some thoughts on that subject.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Maxim. So Scott, go ahead, please introduce yourself and your role, and tell us how the IP framework is a primary focus in your work.
Yeah, so thank you, Alex, for this. So my name is Scott McLeod. I am a first secretary, and I'm a member of the trade policy team at the Embassy of Canada to China. So, the trade policy team is, a little smaller than Maxim's agriculture team, but we're mighty. We focus on the regulatory side. A big part of our focus is on the regulatory side of, Chinese policies, monitoring, analyzing, reporting on China's regulations and policies. A big part of this, an important part of this is intellectual property. Intellectual property on the trade policy team is sort of the only file that has a significant client-facing aspect. So we spend a lot of time dealing with clients. We're functional, so we're cross-sector. We deal in all sectors, and we deal across. We're national, so we deal across China. We work across China with all the trade commissioners. We are connected to Canadian company clients usually through our trade commissioner colleagues. They refer them to us. They talk to companies, and when they have IP issues or want advice on IP, they refer them to us. Whether our trade commissioner colleagues in China or even in the regional offices in Canada, we have several. Trade Commissioner Service has several offices across Canada. And so that's a little bit about what we do.
Thanks so much, Scott. Xiaojuan, as Trade Commissioner, you're probably one of the more familiar roles for those listening to the call, a network that exists globally for Canadians who are looking to export. I'm sure your on the ground experience is something that that they value very much when dealing with you. I'd love it if you could introduce yourself, share a little bit why IP plays, is an important thing as companies are entering the Chinese market.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. And hello, everyone. As Alex mentioned just now, I'm Xiaojuan from the trade policy team at the embassy. And I work together with Scott to cover the IP protection file here in the trade policy team. And one of our major role is to talk to Canadian companies. As Scott mentioned just now, most of our clients are actually referred by our trade commissioner colleagues from the sectors. Normally, to have an IP talk is the first step of the discussion between the Canadian companies and our trade commissioner team. Because as far as we understand, IP planning is often the first challenge Canadian companies face when entering the Chinese market, because China applies very strict first-to-file system regarding patent registration and trademark registration. So this is different from the first-to-use system of Canada. So without early IP registration, Canadian companies always risk losing control of their brand or technology even before they come to China. They may also face counterfeits and encounter costly legal disputes. So we often say IP strategy should never be an afterthought. It always needs to be integrated into the overall business strategy or business plan of a company when they decide to come to China. Because a strong IP strategy helps companies to maintain their competitive edge in the Chinese market, leverage the reputation they have in the international market, and also reduce the risk of infringing others' IP rights or having their IP rights to be infringed in China. So in short, IP planning is not just about protection. It's about enabling the business strategy to move forward without any unnecessary obstacles for companies which wants to come to China. Yeah, that's it from my side.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot about today is going to be about being proactive, and I think part of the words IP strategy implies that it's something that's been thought out and developed beforehand. Sherry, you're general counsel and head of external affairs at McCain Foods in China. Really honored to have your corporate perspective from, a major successful global operator, a Canadian company. Would love if you could introduce yourself, your role at McCain, and tell us a little bit how that proactive IP strategy has been an enabler for a company like McCain's.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sherry. I'm head of legal and external affairs at McCain China. I'm licensed attorney in both China and the state of New York. And for my past 15 years of experiences, I work both as a private practice in US and European law firms that mainly advising investors from the countries to China, as well as in other corporate companies in China. So my practice has consistently focusing on those international clients on navigating China foreign investment regulations and ensure compliance with complex legal frameworks. Certainly, IP plays a vital role, and happy to share today. I think as Xiaojuan mentioned, that is the first step for entering into China, and even before that, we will talk a lot today, but I think like making a plan is quite important as a first step. Thinking what is core for your business and what you want to protect, and then prioritize the protection, because a lot of things you can do in China. I can spend a lot of money and efforts, but what would be very important to your own business that may need the first consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think we've seen a resurgence of interest in the Chinese market. I mean, obviously, our second largest export market for our agricultural goods, and certainly one in which we've had some challenges over the past little while. But I believe still a lot of interest from Canadian business in exploring partnerships and new relationships. I'd love, I think a space in which there are often many misconceptions and, the relationships been evolving. I know that the regulatory landscape within China itself has been evolving. So perhaps, Scott, maybe start with you from a trade policy perspective. Would love to know, what have been those evolutions in the Chinese IP protection framework, and are there any sort of key developments that we should be aware of? Can you give us that sort of inside scoop?
Yes, thanks, Alex. So as you noted, China's IP system definitely has evolved and modernized significantly, especially in the last, say, decade or so, maybe 2 decades. The reasons for this are varied, but a big part of that is the fact that China is now sort of a generator of IP itself. It's one of the leading countries in innovation. It's by volume, it's the biggest patent filer, biggest trademark filer. It's in the top 10 in the Global Innovation Index now. So for China, there is a significant benefit to having to developing a sort of a modern, sophisticated IP system that provides credible protections for its IP. Recent reforms are focused on enforcement, strengthening enforcement, which is sort of a long-term issue in China, improving legal standards and aligning with international norms. So China's IP system has sort of 3 core laws, all of which have been sort of updated recently, say in the last 5 to 10 years. There's the patent law, the trademark law, and the copyright law. The trademark law is actually undergoing its second major revision since 2019. Hopefully that will be out next year. And then there's a major complementary law called the Anti-Unfair Competition Law, which itself has been recently strengthened, and that covers sort of trade secret misappropriation and unfair practices such as false advertising. Of course, there are numerous associated regulations and guidelines, many of which, I would say the vast majority of which, have been sort of modernized in the last 5 to 10 years. And there's constantly new ones coming out as China sort of refines its system. China has sort of, I think in 2017, they established their first specialized IP court. They have sort of 4 main courts, numerous tribunals, and there's been an increased focus on enforcement. China is a signatory to most major international IP treaties, and these are treaties that facilitate cross-border filing and recognition of IP rights. Canadian companies, most relevant for Canadian companies, are probably the Madrid system, which facilitates streamlined international trademark registration, including in China, through a single application process. And there's also the Patent Cooperation Treaty, which does the same thing for patents. So, overall, China's IP landscape is definitely more sophisticated and modernized. However, that's not to say that it's perfect. There are gaps and there are issues and challenges for companies. Most relevant for Canadian companies, at least the clients that we see, trademark squatting is a major issue, and it's one that has continued for years, and it's a very difficult problem for China to be able to solve. There are issues with enforcement is always an issue in China, particularly at the local level. This is again a long-term issue that's sort of hard to sort of fully address. And even with specialized IP courts and tribunals, litigation and then sort of enforcing your rights is still time consuming and resource intensive, and it can be difficult and challenging, and not especially for SMEs and smaller companies that don't necessarily have the resources of some of the larger companies like McCain.
Thanks, Scott. And I'm going to ask everyone a question in a second, but I have a curiosity question based on what you said. You noted that enforcement is a challenge in China. I wondered, is that a problem that both companies domestically in the market are facing, or is it primarily one faced by exporters and people doing business in China?
That's actually a very good question, and I would say it is a challenge faced by both, but it is sort of, I think, coming from a foreign jurisdiction, there are challenges with language, culture, and
right.
And particularly in local regions of China, I would say, that can be a bit more of an issue where there might be a bit of a favoritism towards domestic
Right.
companies. If you're in the main jurisdictions, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, where there are, developed, sophisticated IP courts, and it's less of an issue, I think. But yeah, I mean, domestic companies, Chinese domestic companies are sort of suing each other all the time in IP courts, and yeah, it can be, enforcement is an issue for everyone for sure. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. Just got curious as you were sort of giving us the landscape. I'll open it to the rest of the panelists, and curious from your perspective, what are some common misconceptions Canadian companies, Sherry, either colleagues that you have or companies, Xiaojuan and Maxim, who you're working with, might have about IP protection in China? Anyone want to go first?
Maybe I can start. There are actually several common misconceptions we always hear from Canadian companies. The most common one is China has no IP protection. Even if I register my IP in China, I still cannot enforce it. That's something we hear very often. This is a widespread belief, actually, often because people either hear it from the news or from someone they know who had bad experience in the past. But today, as Scott mentioned just now, China's IP protection environment is evolving, and the reality has changed a lot. If you have an IP right properly registered in China, there is a very big chance that you can enforce it. Although the enforcement could still be costly and time-consuming, but with the growing emphasis China places on IP protection, IP enforcement in China is becoming increasingly effective. This gives the right holders a very strong chance of, not very, but a stronger chance of success. And in fact, sometimes just taking enforcement action itself already has deterrent effect, and many cases are resolved before reaching the lengthy litigation. I think yesterday I just read on the news, it says in the year 2024, in average, the cases solved through mitigation or the agreement outside the court, the cases percentage has reached about 20% or 30%. That's in average for all the IP civil litigation cases. That percentage is already very high. Yeah, and for the second instance court cases, the number might be even higher. That's the most common misconception we hear. And another one, which we also hear a lot, is IP registration is costly. So before I can make sure that I will make profit in the China market, I don't want to invest in that. And maybe I will leave it to my Chinese partner to do that. Well, that is a lot of Canadian companies, they want to deal with the IP protection in that way. leverage IP registration to a Chinese partner, leaving the IP registration to a Chinese partner, or making the Chinese partner the co-owner of their IP, actually create serious risk if the partnership doesn't go well. Some companies choose the co-ownership to encourage their partners to protect IP proactively or enforce the IP right proactively. But this approach requires a clear agreement upfront. Companies need to make sure that they have a contract defines the ownership and rights if the partnership dissolves, and to avoid the future disputes. We also see that type of cases a lot. Yeah.
Really interesting. Anyone else with some misconceptions? You noted a few of the ones I probably had already, but Sherry or Maxim, anything you'd like to add?
Maybe if I may broaden the comment a little bit, I mean, Scott and Xiaojuan are really our IP experts, so I can't compete with them on technical expertise in that area, but just in terms of some of the misconceptions about doing business in China more broadly, which I think also involves IP-related issues, I think the most common there is that a lot of companies, especially SMEs, underestimate what it takes. And by what it takes, I mean everything in terms of marketing strategy, logistics, any kind of localization, and also IP, right? I mean, we have, Scott and Xiaojuan actually have sort of a suite of services that they can provide Canadian clients with kind of a few basic checks, and but that's just beginning, right? That's just sort of a turning on the water and checking the temperature. But the next step in terms of, hiring, your own trademark agent or patent attorney or marketing representative, right? Again, I'm broadening this a little bit into sort of other spheres of other elements of doing business. Companies often underestimate what it takes in terms of financial resources, human resources, corporate bandwidth, and sort of check the temperature of the water before you jump in the shower, but also think about, do you have the capacity to sort of take on the heat?
I may also add on to Maxim and Xiaojuan. I think echo to Xiaojuan's first point that recently I heard a case from the China Supreme Court that for one variety protection case, they ruled around 10 million CAD fine for a foreign invested company. That's because a Chinese company infringed their variety rights. So not only the amount, but also the ruling is in favor of the foreign invested company. And this is not the single case. We saw it more and more often, and the amount is increasing. So I would say that it's very proactive or enforcement in China and tends to the right direction. And for the misconception, actually, I may want to add one little thing, quite simple, but maybe it's not misconception, but a lot of foreign investors, they forget when they enter into China market is to register their Chinese name as a trademark. But it's actually very, very important. Why I want to mention this is because I saw a lot of cases in the past. It's quite understandable that when you have an English brand in Canada and other countries, and you come to China and you only register the English name first. But the reality is that the Chinese consumers, they grab your products at the shelf in the supermarket, or they search it in their online shopping platform. They never type your English name, almost no one. So they use the Chinese name, and I've seen so many companies that mess this up. Taking Amos as an example, they actually registered their trademark, the English one, in 1977, quite early, but they didn't really do for their Chinese one. And another Chinese company actually registered the Amos in Chinese in 1995. So Amos took a lot of effort and money to get the things right. And making a fun fact is that even for McCain, hardly Chinese consumer can pronounce McCain, the the word correctly. But everybody knows us as McCain. It's like similar transliteration as McCain. So it's not only a translation, it's how we sell products in China. Because I mentioned that everybody search us, they tell friends our products only use McCain, the Chinese characteristic. So I would say that it's not only a translation. The Chinese name would be a standalone core IP assets, and it can make money. And another good example is that the winery, Penfolds, Australian winery, they actually registered their Chinese name as Benfu. It sounds like Penfolds, but in Chinese it means chasing prosperity. So like Chinese people really like it because we like to have a good life and making money. So this one actually sells very good because of the Chinese name. So you see all the bad and good examples, and so making a Chinese name right is quite important.
I love that. Thank you. And I agree with many of your comments, and I think it echoes something that we've seen, which is I think sometimes we're very export eager, but we're not necessarily export ready. And probably, at least with, common market, many Canadians export to the United States, our neighbor. We have many commonalities. Within cultural language, etc., that make that a slightly easier, even logistically, it's right across the road, sort of, so to speak. So I could see how the Chinese market would be quite a shift and requires a step back to develop some of those preparatory steps. And I think that that's sort of probably the moral of our session today is around that preparation. And you've provided some really great insights. Maybe we can help people think about what those first steps are. And Xiaojuan, if you could, when a company comes to you, what are the very first practical steps that you recommend that company takes to enter the Chinese market? What are you looking for them to either have done or be ready to do in order to enter? And are there any local resources you recommend?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And as we discussed already earlier, secure IP in China starts with one very critical step, which is developing an IP protection strategy. Because IP strategy is not just important for big corporations; it's equally important for SMEs. A well-developed strategy can make your entry into the Chinese market much smoother, and sometimes it also helps companies to stay competitive globally. To show why this matters, I can share with you two real examples or two real cases we heard from companies. The first case is with a packaged food company. This company planned to sell in China through distributors, but during the due diligence phase, the potential distributor just walked away because the company hadn't registered its trademark in China. Not English trademarks, not French trademarks, no trademarks at all. But someone else already registered the same name in China. Yeah. So the potential distributor was really afraid of being involved in trademark infringement. So the Canadian company faced two very costly options, either to fight to reclaim the trademark or to rebrand and repackage products just for China. Neither of these two options were ideal, actually. The second case happened to a technology company. That company is not agriculture related. It's a tech company selling electronic advertisement screens. The screens can be placed at the subways. That company had patents in other countries, but not in China. A Chinese competitor actually reverse engineered the Canadian products, applied for a Chinese patent, and also exported the products to third country markets. Although the Canadian company didn't sell their products in China, it had to file a patent invalidation request in China just to protect its business in other markets. In both of these cases, the companies did not have an overarching strategy to protect their IP. That's why they encountered those very unfavorable situations. So how do you develop an IP protection strategy? Companies always ask us, do you have a standard format which we can use? But the answer is actually no, because as we said already, the IP strategy should always serve the business strategy. Each company has their own business development strategy in China, so each company may have a different IP protection strategy. But generally, there are mainly 3 steps to develop such a strategy. First of all, or the first step is, as Cherry mentioned already, know what you own and what to protect. The common IP rights include trademark, patent, trade secrets, and copyright. So, well, companies may have all of them, but do they need to register all of them at once? Maybe not, because it's really costly to register a lot of IP at one time. So companies really need to start by protecting their most valuable IP assets, and then expand the protection coverage as their business grows. Step 2 to develop the strategy is to decide the approach, because IP strategy can be offensive strategy, which blocks the competitors from offering similar products. And it can also be defensive strategy, which just ensures the company can use their own IP without any legal risk in China. For most of the SMEs, the registrations are defensive, just to protect their own use and prevent the others to register the IP before they do. And of course, the next step is to take actions. IP system in China and in Canada are share a lot of similarities. For example, the same types of basic IP rights, but these 2 systems also have a lot of differences. For example, China applies first to file principle regarding trademark registration, but Canada applies the first to use principle. And China has invention patent and utility model patent, but Canada only has the invention patent. So to understand the difference of these 2 systems and take proper action in China is really important. One thing to be underlined here is trademark and patent rights are jurisdictional rights. So only the trademarks and patents that registered in China or granted in China can be protected here. The trademark or the patents registered in Canada, in the US, in other jurisdictions are not automatically extended to the Chinese market. And also Hong Kong and Macau are considered as different jurisdictions. So if companies want to get protection in those 2 places, they also need to file separate applications. For trademark protection, one of the most common issue is preemptive registration or trademark slaughter. Someone register the brand name before the companies enter into the China market. That's the case the first case I shared just now. It could be the competitor who files the registration. It can be someone, a former contact, or it can also be someone just to be a complete stranger who knows this brand through different sources, either by visiting Canada or through the online platforms. So when that happens, companies need to either take legal action to reclaim the name or rebrand the name just for China. As we mentioned already many times, China applies first to file principle. So to register early is the key, or it's the most critical action companies need to take. To register one trademark in China takes about 7 to 9 months to finish the whole process. and it costs about 500 to 1,200 Canadian dollars to register one trademark under one class. As foreign companies, you cannot deal with the Chinese Trademark Office directly. You have to go through a China registered lawyer to file the applications. Some Canadian companies choose to work with their Canadian firms, that's fine, but their Canadian firms also need to have a Chinese partner to help them deal with all the administrative things. And for patents, the most common issue we see is not including China in their original application. Later, when the company wants to come to China, they find out their patents are not protected in China. So for patent protection, our main advice is to plan ahead and take into consideration about your business development in China in the future, and also think about the competition in other markets. Because as I described just now in case 2, the Chinese competitors may export products to the third market and to be the competitor in those markets. There are 2 main channels to file a Chinese patent application. The first one is through the Patent Cooperation Treaty channel, which is also known as the PCT patent. This channel or this approach gives company up to 30 months to decide which countries they want to go. So most of the Canadian companies choose this approach because of its flexibility. And another approach to file Chinese patent is to file with the China Patent Office directly. That's just to file a separate Chinese patent. And for trade secret protection, the principle is actually universal, just to keep the information confidential. Use strong internal control and always sign NDAs before sharing information. And even if the NDA is signed, companies should be very cautious with sharing sensitive information. Our advice is better not share it at all, even the NDA is signed. And copyright does exist automatically when the work is finished. But in China, the registration certificate can provide a very strong proof of ownership. And also sometimes the cooperation partner may require Canadian companies to show their copyright registration certificate. So voluntary registration can be worthwhile. IP protection strategy is not an optional strategy. It should be a strategic plan. And companies should start early, align it with the business goal, and take proactive actions of registration to secure their rights in China and also in other markets, actually. As Maxim mentioned already, as a Trade Commissioner Service, what we can do is to help companies do the first round check in the China trademark database to see the availability of trademarks company wants to promote in China. And we can also do some due diligence in the patent database to see what are there and the status of the company's registration. Yeah, that's mostly from my side. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, and super interesting. I wondered if there was sort of an opportunity to do, a search with you or to do that initial assessment to understand that landscape, because obviously I'm sure it increases the complexity significantly if someone's already registered your brand or your core trademark assets in China. Maybe as an offensive strategy on their part, it's something you'd want to know. So great that's a starting point they can take with your team. Sherry, curious, you also obviously have extensive experience in sort of this process of building in the Chinese market. Curious if you have any lessons on any trade-offs. Xiaojuan talked about partnerships. have you had to wrestle with that when sharing information or technology with partners or others in the Chinese market? And how did you protect your IP? Any lessons learned from McCain's experience?
Yep. I think for this question, it's not a simple yes or no, but need a detailed plan. I think Xiaojuan mentioned a lot already. I think better not to share is the most safe way. But when after you enter into the China market, and maybe when you do more here, you will find that at some point you have to share. Then how to do with it, I think the first thing to consider is still think about what is your competitive advantage, what is core for your business, and make a plan around it. In general, I would have the following suggestions. As the first one is share only what is necessary. For instance, is for manufacturing, joint development, or market access, but keep black box for other components. For instance, the formula, the process that which you have a competitive edge. And second is that use structural control, not just the legal control. For investors, usually have the tendency to heavily rely on contractual arrangements. While in China, one of the tips we always give to foreign investors is that in China, signing the contract means the start of the real negotiation. So don't just sign NDA and think everything's fine, but do the monitoring and set the physical boundaries, such as you can modelize the technology so that your local partners never see the full system, or split the process and arranging different suppliers to prevent the full replication and controlled access. For instance, for myself, I can't go into our own R&D lab because my face was not recognized in our own system. So really limit the physical access is quite important. And the last one is that choose a partner carefully and align the incentive. You can conduct upfront due diligence on your partners. It's actually almost free in China. You can check on the credit system to see their background, whether they have infringement cases in the past. The China court system, you can also search freely. They also have English version. And so all those, mainly you can do it freely online. And even ask AI, sometimes it's also works perfectly here, and also globally, I assume. So whether also tie your partners to your business, because sometimes they move away and they learn and copy and making money. It's also because you didn't really get the share right. They can make more money for leaving you. Then why you don't have the right incentive structure that to keep you to work for years and longer so that you share the profit? I think that's quite important. And the biggest mistake is assuming you must choose between full sharing and complete protection. I think in reality, successful companies, they design the technology so that they collaborate is possible without exposing the assets that creates true competitive advantage.
Interesting, and good to know that there are some pathways that are really accessible. I don't know that we could say that in Canada that it's always that easy to do that level of due diligence. In sort of that kind of method, we don't have quite the same accessibility to some of that data. Maxim and Scott, I just want to give you the chance. We've been talking about sort of some practical first step approaches, lessons learned, anything either of you want to share that might be valuable to our audience.
I just want to follow up on a point that Xiaojuan made when she was talking about different forms of IP. Obviously, you have registered IP, unregistered IP. There's some tools that makes it easier or less easy to protect certain forms of IP. What I wanted to focus on is that in certain businesses, maybe not so much in sort of agri-tech, like technology businesses, but any kind of let's say ingredient business or anywhere where there's a formulation involved. So most of the time, sort of recipes and formulas, they tend to be unregistered forms of IP, so essentially trade secrets, proprietary company information. And I think what is really important to realize that regulators in China can be very invasive. Actually, they are very invasive, and different types of products, are regulated by different agencies. State Administration for Market Regulation is a very sort of powerful domestic regulator that regulates things like functional foods, for example, or health foods, and it is quite possible that you may actually have to disclose your formula in your product approval stage. And I mean, to Scott's earlier point, the system is getting better. I mean, you can protect, you can enforce, but the system has leaks, and you have to make. I think the company has to make a business decision, understanding that the risk will never be completely eliminated. Right. And I think Sherry is making the point about, how do you keep your technology? How do you keep your formula always, a step ahead of the competition? There's this analogy that we sometimes use of that Indiana Jones movie with that sort of big granite rock rolling after you. You just have to run faster. But it is a consideration that I think companies always not sort of miss, but don't think about it until it's too late, until it's time to submit your filings and your documents for approval. So I just want to highlight the point on protecting proprietary information and trade secrets. Sometimes it's very challenging when very complex and invasive regulatory processes are involved.
Yeah, I know we have a number within CFIN's membership, a number of ingredient, sort of even food tech leaders working in novel ingredients that certainly would have an interesting market opportunity in China.
We've seen this actually blow up, not so much in the food industry, but in the cosmetics industry, where a lot of cosmetics companies were beside themselves, not knowing what to do when they were getting their formulas approved.
Wow. Yeah. And Scott, any further comment on the discussion?
Yeah, just quickly, one of Sherry's points I feel like is really important, and it's kind of underrated, is that to get your partners to align incentives. I think it's hugely important, especially for SMEs. If an SME can do that, SMEs have limited resources, and enforcing their IP might be a little harder for them. But if they can find a partner, and get, structure their collaboration correctly so that their interests are aligned, particularly if you're talking about a Canadian SME with like a niche technology and they have a large Chinese partner, say, that wants to commercialize, distribute, they can use that if their incentives are aligned, that partner will protect your IP for you, right? You have all their resources at your back. So, you can sort of leverage them to help you protect your IP. And even if you're an SME with, and it's an unfamiliar system and language issues and whatever, you can sort of leverage your partner to use their resources to sort of to help you enforce and protect your IP.
Super interesting. Let's touch on perhaps some of the, what are some of the supports that, your teams, Maxim's, Xiaojuan, are offering, with two Canadian SMEs within the Chinese market. Maxim, I'll start with you. CFIN is a food tech focused organization. We're focused on innovation in the food sector. Curious what you see as the intersection between IP and innovation, for food in the Chinese market. And again, always trying to come back to what are some practical steps that companies could take to align their goals with the priorities that exist on the ground in China, while still safeguarding their IP. Oh, you're still muted.
Oh, sorry about that. Let me maybe start with your second question, and my answer may seem at first a little bit counterintuitive. I think every company, every exporter should actually think whether they do want to align what they do with China's priorities, be it agricultural or otherwise. Chinese leadership has made it no secret that the ultimate goal of China is to become self-sufficient in everything, in anything. So that degree of alignment, I mean, obviously you need to respond to market demands and market needs, otherwise why you're there. But aligning too much may actually make you sort of ripe for the picking, if you will. And so I think it's a balancing decision on sort of how much you align, how much do you continue, again, back to Sherry's point, how fast do you run, how much do you continue to further develop your technologies, your formulas and whatnot. And then I guess in terms of intersection, this is kind of going back to the discussion we just had. I think that would depend on what type of business are you. If you're a tech business, okay, then you got certain tools available to you, such as registering your IP, and kind of then you worry less about disclosing it more freely because you have registered it and you protected it. Whereas if you are more of an, like, let's say, an ingredient business or something that involves sort of recipe formulas, it's more of a proprietary information, trade secrets, which you really need to devise very robust corporate legal structures in order to protect that. And I think to that point, and I'm curious sort of Sherry's views from legal perspective on that. I don't think you will always have an ironclad contract that will prevent abuse or leakage of your IP. The question here is how you're going to compensate yourself out of that situation, right? What kind of recourse will you create for yourself as an IP owner, so that when that date comes and your IP does leak, or your partner walks away from you due to misaligned incentive or any other reason, how will you then compensate yourself and mitigate your loss? And maybe the last point I'll make in terms of government services and where we can help from kind of a broader trade commissioner service perspective. I'd like to say that we're the purveyors of second opinions. We like clients that have done their homework before they come to us, that at least know what they think they want to achieve in the market. And then after we give them our opinion, we'd love for them to walk away and get a third opinion and a fourth opinion, and maybe come back to us again, for another conversation. So we're basically an advisory service, and we can assist with some of that due diligence, but we cannot replace it. And so again, going back to my earlier comment about having the sufficient corporate bandwidth, financial, human resources to be able to engage in China, which is a very highly complex and highly competitive market. The government service cannot replace that for you, right? For the company. You did, Alex, mention about companies sometimes being not export ready. That service is available to Canadian companies actually back home, right? Global Affairs Canada has a network of regional offices, that can do that sort of a preparation for international markets type of service, do that initial step. For some of the companies that are not in agri-tech, more in actual agri-food business, Agriculture Canada also has a network of regional offices across Canada that can help, and certainly we can help make those connections for companies, and Alex, industry groups like yours play extremely important role in kind of doing that sort of early counseling, early education, so that by the time a client ends up in Xiaojuan's mailbox or mine or Scott's, they know they want to be in China, and ideally they know why, right? So that we can help them tackle some of the more specific issues. I'll stop there.
Those great comments. And Scott, perhaps I'll invite you to build, how does the Canadian government support companies that might be facing IP-related challenges abroad? Understanding, of course, Maxim's sort of cautioning comment that doesn't sound like your IP lawyers or the necessarily the executors of the strategy. Curious what tools you do have in your kit that you can support companies with as they might face these types of challenges.
Yeah, so in addition to what Maxim has talked about and, the Trade Commissioner Service and AFC and various sort of services that we provide, I'm just going to run quickly through some of the other sort of programs that are out there for companies. So, the Canadian Intellectual Property Office themselves, together with, TCS and NRC IRAP, they provide a lot of resources through IP Village. They have, they do awareness, education, strategic planning, all kinds of online resources, webinars, and you can actually even sort of talk to an advisor from SIPO for free. Can Export, which is a program run by the Trade Commissioner Service, which many of your members might be familiar with. They offer assistance for Canadian companies to go abroad and sort of look to open new markets for themselves. And as a part of their programs, they offer assistance for IP, registering IP, getting retaining service providers to help assist with IP issues. There's, Elevate IP, which is a federal initiative that offers funding for business accelerators and incubators, focused on IP education, strategy development, implementation for startups. NRC IRAP, many of your clients or many of your members would be familiar with this as well. So National Research Council Industrial Research Assistance Program. So they offer resources and funding for registering and protecting IP and strategy development. And then of course there are various provinces offer. I would say most provinces offer some sort of IP program through various programs that they have. All their sort of international business development programs that they offer. Many of those have an IP component as well. So I think there's actually, to be honest, I think there's more available than you might think, just when you start.
Yeah, I agree. And I think those programs as well, just as much as it sounds like your services benefit from you to have done your homework first and have outlined what your strategy is. It's not those aren't good, much like any funding program, not something you should approach on a whim or just because they're available, you're now going to go to China. That thoughtful assessment of your strategy and what the play is going to be for your company. And obviously, given the timeline it takes to, register your trademark and things like that, this is a process that probably is one that you're not going to execute in 3 months, your market entry into China. This is going to be a 12 to 24 month exercise and something that should be done really strategically.
Yeah, I think a lot of these programs are actually going to help you develop your strategy and sort of, you can go right, from your first thought of I want to go abroad, how do I do that while protecting my IP? And so from the very first information gathering that you do to right up until, until you meet with us, in missions abroad, these programs, I think, sort of take you from start to finish.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we've given lots of good advice, and this might be a bit repetitive, but I'll perhaps start or offer each of you just the opportunity, any real closing, most important key piece of advice or takeaway. If I'm an innovative company considering that Chinese, my Chinese market entry, what should I keep in mind absolutely first and foremost? Anyone want to chime in and kick us off?
Maybe I can start.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, the most important takeaway we always want to share with company is to plan early and register early. Because start your IP registry, IP strategy before entering the Chinese market, and register either the trademark or the patent early is the most cost-effective way to avoid any future disputes. That is the most cost-efficient way to protect your IP. Yeah.
I think that might be everyone's advice. Does anyone else want to, Maxim, do you want to comment as well? Or Scott?
Maybe I'll just jump in quickly and build on what Xiaojuan said. So just in addition to that, I mean, a key point, which I know Xiaojuan says to our clients every phone call, basically, don't hesitate to enforce your rights and take actions, like take a step. It might seem sort of maybe a little bit scary or a little bit, like, oh, I don't want to start down that path because then I'll get dragged into this long time, long process, resource intensive. It's going to cost me a lot. I'm going to get, through all this hassle. There are steps, even just taking an initial step can sometimes solve the problem. And there are steps that you can take that are not costly and they're easier. If you're e-commerce, you can just, do a, file a complaint with their sort of the platform's IP services, and you can get, sometimes that's enough. So don't hesitate. And if you do take action, I think the important thing is to get some expert advice, someone from on the ground, who understands the system, because there are lots of little sort of idiosyncrasies and nuances in the Chinese system that you wouldn't know unless you were. And so if you are going to take an action, having someone who knows has a deep expertise in this in IP in China, and who knows all those little tricks and pitfalls is extremely important.
We all need a sherry in our in the Chinese market. It sounds like.
Yeah. I echo to Scott and Xiaojuan. I think it's quite important to plan ahead as early as possible, as well as maybe be in mind to do a IP clearance search before your file. That's quite important because sometimes you focus on your own part too much that you forget maybe you're infringing others' rights. So that's it's also cheap here, so it's not really expensive. I think the misconception is right. Not only filing, but doing those kind of searches are quite cheap. And also, I heard that the Canadian government can provide a lot of services. But if you, as Scott mentioned, if you find a reliable partner here in China, you will find more opportunity offered by the local Chinese government as well. And because China is pro innovation so much, actually IP can help you to make money as well. Like even have like a tax different percentage because you have a lot of innovation, trademark registrations. Like corporate tax usually in China is 25%, but you can get 15 if you're being recognized as an innovative company, etc. So all those kind of opportunities are there, and you can explore.
Maxim, any closing comment on that, or did your colleagues do a bang up job?
Everything they said, I support.
Perfect. Yeah. Maybe just as a wrap up question, in the sense of, we don't have an audience today, but many of us often look to go into a market for the first time through a key trade show or an event, and usually use that as your sort of opportunity, maybe to even go understand a market or see it on the ground, walk one of these shows. I'm curious if there are any major Chinese agri-food events that you'd recommend for Canadian exporters who are interested in the market. Maxim, I don't know if you want to start us there.
Yeah, so I guess I'll focus on non-agri-tech because again, we haven't sort of looked into the technology side of food too much, kind of on a proactive basis. But certainly in the agriculture and agri-food space, there's a lot of events. There's an event for packaged foods and beverages. That's the China Food and Drink Fair. Happens every March in Chengdu in Sichuan province. The China International Import Expo, the mega sort of the darling flagship show of the Chinese government, happens every year in November, has a very large agricultural component to it. The consumer products expo in Haikou I believe it's in April or May every year on the Hainan Island. And by the way, Hainan is a free port. Right now, the entire island is a giant free trade zone, and a lot of companies, including in the agri-food space, are actually establishing processing and packaging and manufacturing facilities in Hainan to take advantage of a lot of duty-free type benefits, industrial duty-free benefits, and then send product to the mainland afterwards. We have a couple of clients actually employing this exact strategy. There's Xiao China, Food and Hotel China. There is a dedicated show for nutraceuticals. I would just maybe caution a little bit of using these major trade shows as kind of diving headfirst into those major trade shows. They can be quite expensive if you want to come and exhibit. So I would think as a first step, a good idea, like you mentioned, Alex, to maybe walk the show, come as a visitor, or maybe join with, sometimes we organize Canadian pavilions at some of these shows. So joining through something like that, which could give you kind of a smaller footprint as an exhibitor, but it would be a lot more cost effective because the cost of trade shows are quite high in China, and this needs to be watched carefully.
Yeah, I think given all we've talked about requiring a thoughtful entry, I think most Canadian SMEs might full stop, not purchase a booth space. I was thinking walking the show, but sometimes that's a good way to get a sense of what the opportunity is. Yeah,
jumping in with us sometimes when we do often value-added activities, with or without a physical booth space. But we obviously always try to I guess bring together all Canadian clients that may be either exhibiting independently or just visiting the show for some kind of a value-added program. So always worth checking with our network on that subject as well.
Absolutely. And, I think we'll close it there. I think that's a great launching point to open with. I want to say thank you to all of you. I recognize that we're, I think, 13 hours apart. So what is a morning time for me is very late in the evening for you. And I think you've all brought a lot of great insights and energy late in the day. So my sincere thank you from CFIN for joining us and sharing your insights. It's been a real pleasure and certainly an educational experience for me. And I look forward to hearing more, as we continue to sort of retake up the relationship, I think, with more concerted effort with China. And I'm excited to see what's on the horizon for Canadian agri-food in that country.
Thanks for having us, Alex.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.